edition of the Crash Course Podcast. My name is CraigCrash Collins. A lot to get to tonight. We're going to be talking about the college football playoff, the Spoilermakers making their name known as they knock off Michigan State, how that affects the playoff picture. We're also going to be talking some college basketball as well, our NCAA basketball preview. We're going to be talking conference predictions, Final Four predictions, a lot to get to, a lot on the way. Let's go ahead and hop right in.
Stack that bitch up, mate.
Recording in progress.
Welcome back to the Crash Course Podcast. My name is CraigCrash Collins, and I'm not joined by anybody this week. B. Scott has taken the week off. He's dealing with the move right now, moving to his new house. So we wish him the best. He and his family with moving to their new place. We may see a appearance from the MCT Podcast's own Michael Robinson. He might be here just a little bit later, but for now, you know what? You tune in and you get to see CraigCrash Collins. All my Craig stands in the chat. They're like, okay, you know what? B. Scott, the B. Scott stands are gone. It's now just you guys. I get to talk to you, the people, you, the chat, you, the audience. It's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to get into a lot of college sports tonight. We're going to talk about the college football playoff, how that was affected by the Spoilermakers. I got my Purdue gear on. We're also going to talk some college basketball, our preview for the season as well. Of course, last week we talked about the Indiana schools. Now we move on to the rest of the country, kind of like what we do for college football. So a lot to get into on the podcast tonight. Very excited. Now, there was no MCT podcast, and the World Series has ended since the last time we were on. So I do want to give just a quick little kind of wrap up of that. Of course, the Atlanta Braves defeating the Houston Astros in 6 games. Shout out to Trevor Plouffe, big John Boy Media fan. So it was cool to see his prediction at the beginning of March come true, or the end of March, I guess it was. So that was really cool. Really cool for my friends that are Braves fans. Ben Bowsman, one of the guys you've seen in Memory Lane, he grew up a Braves fan. He's since become a Cubs fan, but he grew up a Braves fan, has a lot of Braves fans in his family, so cool in that respect. And a lot of cool things in the works. Of course, winning in this season after the passing of Hank Aaron, that's pretty cool to get that win for him. Freddie Freeman finally getting a ring, that's really cool to see. There's a lot of players that you love. First and foremost, I mean, Jorge Soler winning the World Series MVP, and with 3 crazy homers. I mean, if you're going to pick a time to have 3 amazing home runs, it might as well be on the literal first at bat of the series to open things up, to take the lead in what was turning out to be, it was in Game 4. Jorge Soler hits the go-ahead home run there, which. That would have, if he doesn't hit that home run, who knows? Maybe the Astros tie the series at 2, and it's a whole different thing we're talking about. And then, of course, hitting that mammoth home run in game number 6 to set the tone for the Braves to win it all. So really cool to see that come to fruition. A Braves team that I know that my World Series prediction was completely wrong. My prediction, of course, the Padres and Yankees, that didn't even last until the actual DS of the playoffs. And of course, we had Michael and Chris. I can't remember exactly if they had the White Sox winning it, but I know they had both of them had like White Sox Braves. So at least they had one of the 2 teams. So I got to tip my cap over there. But yeah, I just wanted to kind of wrap up the World Series. It was really cool to see the Braves get the win. A Braves team that, since this whole kind of rebuild, where they've, since gotten Acuna and Albies, Dansby, it's, I know Acuna wasn't really part of the the run here, but it's really cool to see that group get their championship. So well, I'm sure the MCT boys will talk about it a little bit more. B. Scott and I will talk about it a little bit more as like the awards come out, the off season gets more into full force. So really. Wanted to touch on that here briefly, but it kind of cleanses the palate, gets you ready for the playoff conversations that we're going to have, because we are going to talk. We're going to talk a lot about Final Fours on tonight's podcast in terms of the college football playoff Final Four. We're also going to give our Final Four predictions. So, we had our first taste of the college football playoff rankings last Tuesday. It released, much to a lot of controversy, much to a lot of people angry and upset. Mostly because Cincinnati not in the top 4 after getting all the way to number 2 in the AP polls. The first college football playoff rankings, which depending on when you're listening to this, the second ones may already be out or maybe ready to come out. But you had Georgia, Alabama, Michigan State, Oregon. That is your top 4. Ohio State, Cincinnati, Michigan, Oklahoma, Wake Forest, and Notre Dame round out the top 10. It sparked controversy, especially from the group of 5 fans. Why? Well, I mean, it really stinks when you kind of already know it, but when you basically start every single college football season with 65 teams, I think is the number of group of 5 schools, like not being able to even have a shot, that's pretty, not great. And, you say all you want about like, well, we don't want to see teams get blown out. Well, guess what? I didn't look up the number, but I'd be interested to see how many games in the college football playoff all time have been blowouts. Like how many games have been decided by one possession in the college football playoff? I know there's a lot of games, to my knowledge, like even just championships. I know the first, I think Ohio State, it pretty much dominated Oregon that year. I can't remember what the final score was, but I don't think that game was, I know Ohio State pretty much controlled that game. I know the first 2 Clemson Alabamas were good. Then Alabama Georgia obviously was amazing. The third and final championship version of Alabama and Clemson was a blowout. Then of course you've got LSU, running all over Clemson, and then last year with Ohio State getting thumped by Alabama. So I mean, even the championship games, it's not like you're getting the best quality. And I know, that's not necessarily fair because you kind of do run into that whole thing where like, well, I mean, you can't really, those are the 2 best teams. You can't help that it's a blowout. I mean, we've seen BCS games be the same way. We've seen plenty of championships across all sports be very lopsided. So you can't really fault that. But at the same time, like if you're going to just say like, well, we think this team might get blown out, so we're not going to even include them in the championship. Well, that's not really a very good way to go about things. So expansion talks were tabled until December 1st. So I guess we'll have to wait a little bit longer to see when there might be even a whisper of college football playoff expansion. So looking at this past weekend, Georgia, Michigan, Notre Dame, they all rolled in their games. But otherwise, there was pretty much chaos across the board. You have Alabama barely squeaking by LSU 20-14. You have Oregon surviving against Washington 26-16. Ohio State outlasting Nebraska 26-17. Which, you know what, I'm excited about that one because that was the CraigCrash Wheel of Misery pick where I picked Nebraska to at least cover the spread. They did that. Very excited about that one. If you pay attention to that content that we put out there on TikTok. So, very excited about that one. You had Cincinnati. They needed a goal line stand to defeat Tulsa. You had UNC. North Carolina upsetting Wake Forest 58-55, roughly eliminating the ACC from the college football playoff. And that's wild in and of itself, just because like you're excluding group of 5 teams, right? We're saying there's 65 teams out of 130 every year that don't matter in terms of the championship picture. And then by the first week of November, you've effectively eliminated like how many teams in the ACC? 16. You've essentially eliminated 16 more teams. So that's math, over 80 teams that are already eliminated. Now, granted, I mean, it's not that you want necessarily a field of 50 teams or whatever it would be, but in the sense of you're excluding, basically what I'm getting at is you're excluding 5 conferences based on, oh, well, they're not high quality enough. Yet one of the conferences that you consider high quality is eliminated because there's only one team that you've considered good for the last however many years, and they are having a down year. So the rest of the conference really didn't have a leg to stand on. I mean, if Wake had managed to get all the way to the end, it would have been interesting to see, like, okay, Wake Forest, not only is Wake Forest not necessarily, a big-time football program, but they're not necessarily a school that's known for a huge fan base. And I mean, I'm sorry if there's going to be, Demon Deacon fans in the mentions. Comment below if you're a Demon Deacon fan watching this podcast. But it's not a school. I mean, obviously you have Chris Paul, Tim Duncan on the basketball side of things from Wake Forest. The basketball side of things has usually been pretty good. They've had a couple of good BCS seasons. I remember that year that they played Louisville in the BCS. But had they run the table, I mean, would they have been in there? I mean, and that's the thing. You apply. You put. I mean, if Cincinnati and Wake Forest were to play right now, I think it would be a fairly close game, and there's only one of those two teams. Like, if you swap the resumes and gave Wake Forest a win over number 7 Notre Dame at the time, and Notre Dame's still in the top 10 and one of the darlings of the college football playoff, I mean, Wake Forest probably starts off like at least 5th or 6th with a chance to get in, and might even be the 4th team. They might be leaving Oregon out. They might be leaving, Ohio State out, if that's the case. But we do get the upset special. We'd obviously be remiss if we didn't talk about it. The Spoilermakers. I'll show off the shirt one more time. The big win for Purdue, upsetting number 3 Michigan, the second time this season they've knocked off a top 3 team. This time in front of a raucous fan base at Ross-Ade. Purdue did lead 21-14 at the half. That was courtesy of a crazy trick play to Jackson Anthrop. If you haven't seen that, go check out the YouTube channel, or it's also on the TikTok page. So go give that a look. Then in the second half, you had King Daru scoring a 1-yard touchdown run in the third, and then it was mainly Purdue field goals from there on out. Purdue does go on to win 40-29. Aiden O'Connell goes 40 for 54 with 536 yards, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. David Bell, 11 catches, 217 yards, and a touchdown on the night. So pretty gosh darn crazy to think about, where we're at in terms of what the Spoilermakers were able to do against Michigan State this past weekend. So Michigan State, they were number 3. They're likely going to be out of the top 5, I would imagine. That's pretty much goes without saying. But we look at what we think the college football playoff rankings will be this week. I mean, obviously, I don't think Georgia, Alabama will move, because that's the thing. I don't want to dog on, because I mean, Alabama obviously has earned its reputation, and I think that's part of the frustrating part for fans, especially myself included. I mean, part of this is about being self-aware. Part of this is about, taking, a look inside, kind of saying, okay, why do I not like to see Alabama be, up there so much? And part of it's because they're just so gosh darn good. They're kind of like the Patriots, where you're just like, part of the reason I don't like you is because you're so good. But Georgia and Alabama, what I was getting to is that, like, Oregon and Ohio State barely beating their, under 500 opponents, or their, not so great opponents this week, might hurt them. Whereas you see, Alabama barely beat LSU, and there's going to be no question about them staying at number 2. So it's likely going to be Georgia, Alabama 1-2 again. I was trying to decide if Ohio State, who had a little bit more of, I don't know, I don't want to say convincing win, because both Oregon and Ohio State won on the road by 10 points or less against a team that has struggled this season. for the most part. I mean, Nebraska's 3-7, Washington's 4-5. So, I mean, you don't really know, kind of how to differentiate between those two teams. Now, I will say I went with I predicted Oregon will be third just because I mean they've got the head-to-head against Ohio State, so it's kind of hard to dispute that as far as if they will be in that position. So I went Oregon number 3 and Ohio State number 4. But I wanted to take this moment though to get on to a little bit of a rant here, and there's a reason why. When we were, in the thumbnail, you see Purdue. We amped up Purdue a lot, in this segment here. And that's because of the college football playoff. Last week, what I thought was funny, in all my psychotic ramblings on Twitter, I was like, I was getting all mad that Cincinnati was being left out. Like, cool, it's awesome to know that, since like, what more does Cincinnati have to do to get considered? And one of the things I saw while perusing on Twitter was that the projected point spread for the current college football playoff, and then that's current as far as what it was last week. Like, obviously these will be different. This will be an outdated part of the segment. Even tomorrow. When it releases on YouTube and Anchor. Georgia would open as a 15-point favorite against Oregon, and Alabama would have opened as a 17.5-point favorite over Michigan State. So all the talk about, well, we don't want Cincinnati. I mean, I saw a few tweets that were like, that were pro the way the playoff rankings came out, and they were like, good. I'm glad that the College Football Playoff Committee knows that I don't want to see Cincinnati get blown out. I saw that tweet and I wanted to respond with like, dude, the current college football playoff is projected to be 2 blowouts. It's not like Georgia opened up as 7-point favorites against Oregon. It's not like Alabama opened up as 3-point favorites against Michigan State. They're opening up by the same margins as like Nebraska and Oklahoma, Nebraska and Ohio State. You're telling me you want to see Nebraska, Ohio State in the college football playoff because that's the same point spread. So I thought that was kind of funny because it was like, oh, Cincinnati's going to be blown out. I'm glad we don't want to see that. I'm glad we're not going to see that. And it's like, dog, it's the same point spread that you would normally see in a lopsided game. I mean, I can't imagine that Alabama would open or Georgia would open as much more of a favorite against a Cincinnati than they apparently were against an Oregon and a Michigan State. So I thought that was funny that, to all the talk about the blowouts, and yet the 2 college football playoff games would open as double-digit, spreads. Curious how that works. Like I said before, there's already a Power 5 conference eliminated from playoff contention. That's the ACC, so rip to them. It's the first time the ACC will not be represented in the college football playoff format. Now, granted, I will be happy with any expansion, and please save that clip because I'm sure they're going to expand to like 5 teams, and it's going to be awful, and we're going to come back to this and be like, well, Craig, you said you're going to be happy with any expansion, and I'm going to curse the fact that I said those words. But the one format that that came out during the summer and that I was really excited about. We talked about it with B. Scott. We talked about it with Dapper Dan, who was here. We talked about it with B. Scott, Chris Simmons, everybody. And that's the 12-team format that was proposed earlier on in the summer. That's what I have my fingers crossed for. That's where you would have the 6 highest ranked conference champions, regardless, no matter what. If you win the Big Ten, doesn't matter. If you're Ohio State, doesn't matter if you're not Ohio State. they would have the 6 conference champions and then 6 at-larges, which currently, with the college football playoff rankings that came out last week, would be the conference champions would be Georgia, Ohio State, Oregon, Cincinnati, Oklahoma, Wake Forest. Obviously, that outlook's a little bit different now. The at-larges would be Alabama, Michigan State, Michigan, Notre Dame, Oklahoma State, Baylor. In retrospect, I probably should just use the AP rankings for this instead of using last week's and now outdated college football playoff rankings. But regardless, the bracket would look like this. Georgia, Ohio State, Oregon, Cincinnati would all have byes. You would see number 5 Alabama versus number 12 Baylor, number 6 Michigan State versus number 11 Oklahoma State, number 7 Michigan against number 10 Notre Dame, and number 8 Oklahoma versus number 9 Wake Forest. So first of all, can't tell me that Oklahoma Wake Forest wouldn't be a good game. You can't tell me Michigan Notre Dame wouldn't be a good game. Michigan State Oklahoma State would be fun. Alabama might. I mean, honestly, against Baylor, who knows? But the point I'm trying to make is that it's not, at this point, like, it's not just about getting a group of 5 school in the college football playoff, which obviously we all want to see. But it's also about the fact that, like, tying it all back into Purdue. And I know that, this is usually a Purdue-leaning podcast. You have B. Scott, you have me, who are Purdue fans. B. Scott way more than I am. But the fact of the matter is that Purdue is still in contention for the Big Ten championship. Obviously, they've got a little bit of a hill to climb. They don't have the head-to-head over Wisconsin, which would have been nice. But the win over Michigan State makes this weekend's game against Ohio State just all that much more meaningful. And Purdue is still in the hunt for a Big Ten championship. But we know that even if they were to beat Ohio State, even if they were to then finish out the season undefeated and somehow make their way to Indianapolis, and then even after that, even if they make it to Indianapolis and beat Ohio State, play the ultimate Spoilermaker role of beating Ohio State twice, now granted, I guess if they beat Ohio State twice, then maybe they actually get, some sort of consideration. Although if Ohio State gets beat again, who knows what that'll look like. But I digress. The point of the matter is, if Purdue wins the way it is now, they're not even considered for the college football playoff. But because we've seen it before, we've seen teams win the Big Ten, Penn State, and not make it to the college football playoff. We've seen teams not even make the college football or the conference championship, Ohio State, and still make it in. So basically, the long form point is that we have this great story in the Purdue Spoilermakers, and yet they're not even going to have a chance to compete under the current format, because it doesn't matter if they win the Big Ten, because conference championships don't matter unless it's the team that the committee wants to see. So that's what kind of stinks. And I hate getting into the college football playoff discussion all the time, because I feel like I rehash it every single time, the same points of, like, this stinks in college football. Conference championships don't matter, and they need to matter. The final week of the season, when you have all these conference championships, it should matter. Who wins, and it'd be great to see a team, that you wouldn't maybe normally see. If Purdue were to make the conference championship game against an Ohio State, against a Michigan, against whoever, that would be so fun to watch, to see if the Spoilermakers, I know it's probably getting annoying that I keep referring to them as that, but it'd be fun to see them have a chance to make the college football playoff, and it's just not the case in the current format. So, that's what I kind of, just kind of makes me think of, is the fact that, like, you have a team, you have a great story, you have a team known for pulling upsets and being able to rise up against the top teams of the country, and yet they won't even get considered under the current format. Whereas in a new format where they actually recognize conference champions and things like that, they would still have a fighting chance. So that's the college football playoff rant for this week. And so we now are going to get into our friends of the show. We want to first talk about Anchor. They allow us to put on the podcast every week, anchor.fm. It's really easy to use. You go into Anchor and you upload. You can either record right to the website, or you can upload your own audio, and it will disperse it to a bunch of different websites: Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, wherever podcasts can be heard. And it's really cool. They give you a chance to monetize right away, which is really cool to see, because you can just kind of get out there, get your feet wet, start making a little bit of extra cash. It's not a lot. I won't, pretend like you're going to get rich or anything, but it is a lot of fun to get your podcast career going in that regard. So yeah, we are brought to you by Anchor, and we're very grateful to have them, allow us to put the podcast on every week. We also want to give a shout out to Eat Lunch and Board Game. That's the podcast that my cousin has. He supports us. We want to support him. He interviews someone big in the board game industry every week. It's about how board games can build bridges, within your career. So that's really cool to tackle things from that angle. So go over there and check that out as well. And then remember that you can, remember where you can find us at. Of course, we stream live every week, twitch.tv/CraigCrash every Monday. Although I think next week we're going to start recording on Tuesday and then releasing Wednesday. Remember, you can follow us at 3C Media Sports on Twitter, 3C Media on Facebook. You can find us on TikTok, 3C Media, as well as our YouTube channel, 3C Media. So we've got the MCT podcast over there. We've got all of our college basketball previews for the state of Indiana. So we previewed the mid-majors, Notre Dame. We previewed IU. We previewed Purdue. Every single team, not every single team, but every single one of those videos is on the YouTube channel. So go over there, check that out. If you missed last week's podcast and you're like, hey, I just want to hear about Purdue, I just want to hear about IU, that's where you can find those. You can also find the MCT podcast. Those guys are killing it over there every week. You can catch that as well as some other standalone content. So go over there, check that out. Also, we've got some standalone segments on TikTok, the CraigCrash Wheel of Misery. We've got we've got Small Talk. We've got a lot of content coming your way, so make sure you're locked in 3C Media on YouTube and TikTok. And then remember that you can listen every week on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, wherever podcasts can be heard, you can hear the Crash Course podcast. So now let's go ahead and shift gears into our college hoops conversation. I'm going to take a swig of Gatorade real quick. Gatorade, hashtag not an ad. Put your favorite Gatorade flavor in the comments if you've made it this far. But anyway, so let's go ahead and get into the college hoops conversation. Of course, like I said, we talked about the Indiana schools last week, and then this week we want to talk about the rest of the country. So first things first, we kind of have some hot or cold questions for each conference, going through each one of them here. And first we want to start, we kind of went in alphabetical order. I think the main question concerning the ACC this year, is Duke going to return to form? We know it's Coach K's last year. We know that's going to be, an interesting storyline to follow this season. But how will Duke look in this final season under Coach K? For me, I don't think they are going to return to form. And I know I left this question kind of broad because you could say, well, hey, if they make the NCAA tournament, that's returning to form. But I'm just talking about, like, honestly, I see this Duke team being a first weekend exit, whether it be the first round, one of those, Duke against, what was the team that beat them, kind of unexpectedly a couple years? Was it Winthrop that beat them one year? I can't remember. Anyway, I can see that happening because basically basically Duke lost a lot from last season. They are preseason number 9. They do return their leading scorer amongst, they do return their 4th leading scorer in Wendell Moore. He is the leading scorer amongst returning players. He averages 10 points a game. Their top 3 leading scorers are gone. They've just lost a lot of talent. You have Jalen Johnson, who's now on the Hawks, DJ Stewart, and Matt Hurt, both also left for the NBA, and Jordan Goldwire transferred to Oklahoma. Johnson, Stewart, and Hurt were the top 3 leading scorers and the top 4 3-point shooters. So they lose a ton of talent from their roster. Theo John is touted as their key transfer. He comes in from Marquette. He averages 8 points, 5 rebounds. So, I mean, that's a solid piece, but I don't see that, I don't see him being, the big force on that team that you would expect to see. I don't see him making, a huge difference on whether or not this Duke Blue Devils team is good or bad. Some predict that Duke will win the ACC, and they have a lot of talented freshmen coming in. So, I mean, obviously in basketball, having a good freshman class does mean a lot more, but you have a lot of youth on this team. And I think with the exception of a few players here and there, I think the years of having 5 NBA ready freshmen coming in, completely, taking your team to the next level, I think those days are at least not as in full force as they used to be. So having a good freshman class is great, but I don't think it means as much in the day as it did in the days where they were like, hey, literally every one and done player come to my school and win an NCAA tournament and then leave. So I think it does hold some weight to have a good freshman class, but it doesn't mean as much as it did maybe even a few years ago. And they do have a tough schedule. They play 2 games against, ranked Florida State, North Carolina, and Virginia. So they've got a tough schedule, youth, uncertainty. It's got the components to where, yeah, sure, the ceiling is high. It kind of reminds me, I said Purdue by accident at the beginning of the segment. It kind of reminds me of Purdue last year, where hey, they've got a lot of things that could go right. They've got a high ceiling, but if things go right, they could be in good shape. But if things don't go right, who knows? Who knows? They have a high ceiling, but they also have a pretty low floor as well. So, I think that it's going to be a good year for Duke. I just don't think it's going to be that storybook ending where they, make the Sweet 16, make the Elite 8, make the Final Four, go to the, the championship game. I don't see that happening. I see it being a good season. Maybe they win the ACC tournament. Like I said, I guess I kind of, in a way, intentionally left it broad just so you could kind of, play, both sides of the coin. But I just don't see it being a storybook back to form Duke dominating season like we're used to maybe in years past. So I don't see Duke getting back to form. Another question mark going into the season, of course, is your defending champion Baylor Bears as we shift gears over to the Big 12. The big question in that situation is Baylor a Final Four team? I mean, is Baylor a team in basketball that's going to be kind of here to stay as far as dominating teams, or are they just kind of a culmination of some great recruiting classes, some great roster building? They had their championship, a lot of talent's gone, and then now they're not very good. They're going to have a couple of down years in that regard. And I think that's more what I said. The latter is going to be more of what we see. I think Baylor is not a Final Four team. They're a tournament team for sure. But I just don't see them being a Final Four team, so that is a cold take. The Bears do lose Jared Butler, who's with the Utah Jazz, Maseo Teague, who's in the NBA as well, and Davion Mitchell, who is with the Kings. That's their top leading scorer. So top 3 leading scorers. Their top 3 in assists. Their top 3 of the top 4 3-point shooters, and players that accounted for 43 of the team's 77 points per game during their NCAA tournament run. So that's a big chunk of talent, a big chunk of what made this team a championship team last season. They are out the door. They do add James Aquino from Arizona. He averages 16 points, 5 assists per game last season for the Wildcats. So having him kind of smooths things out, makes it a better situation for the Baylor Bears. But I just don't see them this is basically going to be Craig has doubts about a lot of the top teams and across the country in college basketball, because I mean Baylor does come in as a top 10 team coming into the season, and they may very well be that, but it just seems like, again, just kind of like Duke, they lost a lot of talent, and yeah, sure. And even then, Duke, when you're talking about losing a lot of talent, well, they're still Duke. They bring in a lot of great players. Baylor, I mean, yes, they're in a great position right now with coaching and all that kind of thing, but in recruiting, but they're also not the program level of Duke. So I just think last year's Baylor team was loaded, and I think the Bears have just lost too much from a year ago to be a Final Four team. Again, I think they're going to be a tournament team. I think they're going to be a force to be reckoned with in the Big 12. I just don't see them being a Final Four team. So moving on to the Big Ten. The Big Ten last year is just wild to think about how many teams they had in the NCAA tournament. 9 teams. They almost had, I mean, the Big Ten isn't obviously 10 schools anymore, but just the fact that they almost had 10 teams in, I mean, that's literally the Big Ten. they had nearly 10 teams in the NCAA tournament last year. I mean, they had Michigan, Illinois, Purdue, Maryland, Ohio State, Rutgers, Michigan State, Wisconsin, Iowa. Just so many teams in it last year. And we talked about what the Big Ten may look like when we talked about IU and Purdue. But the question is the Big Ten a 9-bid conference again? And for me, I just don't think so. You have Michigan. Michigan's going to be really good this year. I'm excited to see what Michigan, could potentially do. I know Michael from the MCT podcast doesn't like to hear that necessarily because he's an Ohio State fan, but it's going to be a good season for Michigan. They return Hunter Dickinson, who averaged 14 points, 7 rebounds last season. The Big Ten preview that I read was from Sports Illustrated, and they have the top recruiting class, going to Michigan. So, I mean, you have a great player who's going to be surrounded by great young talent, great coaching in Juwan Howard. I think Michigan's going to be good again. We talked about Purdue last week. That's on the YouTube channel. Go check it out. That released earlier today, which is Monday when we're recording this. So make sure you go check that out. I don't know why exactly I'm doing this because I'm not talking any quieter than I was before, but we're still going to just stick with the bit here. Purdue is going to be a good team. Very excited to see where they go. I'm drinking some of the Kool-Aid that B. Scott, because look, here's the thing. Purdue typically, when you're talking to Purdue fans, it's all doom, I relate to it as a Cubs fan in the sense that, pre-2016 Cubs, where it's just kind of all doom and gloom. Like, yeah, cool, the season might be good, but at the same time, what's going to go wrong? What's going to happen? As we have Stump Papa in the chat, he's going to have us up for a little bit. So I appreciate you watching, Stump Papa. Thanks for dropping in. But yeah, it's wild, to think that, a fan base, someone in the fan base of Purdue like B. Scott is actually very optimistic about the season, how the season is going to go. So you know what? I'm drinking that Kool-Aid as well. I think Purdue's going to have a good season. We talked about how solid they are. Illinois returns Kofi Cockburn, 18 points, 10 rebounds last season as part of 3 of the top 4 returners scoring, so they're going to be good again. You've got Ohio State returning E.J. Liddell. 16.7 rebounds. They do get Cedric Russell from Louisiana Lafayette, who averages 17 points a game. So Ohio State's going to be good. You've got Maryland, who returns their leading scorer, Eric Ayala, who averaged 15 points a game last year. They get Fats Russell from Rhode Island, who averaged 14 points, 5 rebounds, 5 assists last year for Rhode Island. Quidus Wahab from Georgetown is another transfer they have, 13 points, 8 rebounds last season. So Maryland gets a lot of talent. They're going to be good again. I think Rutgers is going to be a wild card. They do return 2 of the top 3 leading scorers from their team last year, Ron Harper, who averaged 15.6 rebounds last season, and Geo Baker, who averaged 10 points. Michigan State, I always feel bad when I doubt Michigan State because every time I doubt them, they tend to go on insane runs. So this is probably, hey, Michigan State, be happy that I'm picking against you, because they lost the leading scorer from a team that was a play-in team last year, and Wisconsin and Iowa both lost a lot of talent. So those are your three teams from last year that I'm like, I don't know if they get in. We've talked about IU, which, I know there literally 0 games have been played by this point that we're recording this, but they have, IU in there as a tournament team potentially, and there are some teams that could fill out those 9 teams, but just from what we're looking at here, I just don't see the Big Ten having 9 teams. They could have 7, they could have 8. I mean, 9 is just such an insane number, and I just don't see that happening again. So, if I were to pick it right now, I would say Michigan State just because they always seem to be there. Rutgers is going to be there. I feel very confident in Maryland, Ohio State, Illinois, Purdue, and Michigan. I think they're all going to be in as well. I just, I don't see it with Wisconsin. I don't see it with Iowa. So we'll see what happens, and maybe, Northwestern can sometimes be surprising. IU could sneak in there if they have a good year. So there's chances that they could swap some teams out and they could be, a 9 big conference again. I just don't see it with the way things are currently looking. So 2 conferences left to talk about here. I'm going to talk about the Pac-12 for a second. Their biggest question, I think, right now is UCLA a Final Four team? I mean, it was so funny seeing all the memes last year of, people who said, like, hey, I thought Michigan State was going to beat UCLA in the play-in game, and then I figured that Michigan State, because they seem to be a team that goes on these insane runs in the tournament, that, I picked Michigan State in my bracket pool. And as a result, I'm, just taking UCLA all the way to the bank here. They are the preseason number 2, and this is the first hot take that I've had so far tonight. On the program. They do return leading scorer Johnny Juzang. He averages 16 points, 4 rebounds per game last season. They also get Jamie Jock back, 12 points. He averaged 12.6 rebounds last year. Tiger Campbell, 10 points, 5 assists is what he averaged last year. Jules Bernard, who averaged 10 points, 5 rebounds, and Cody Riley, who averaged 10 points, 5 rebounds as well. Bernard, Jock, Jiang, and are the top 3-point shooters on the team. They also get Miles Johnson from Rutgers, who averaged 8 points. 8 rebounds per game last season. So, I mean, this UCLA team is just completely loaded. Very excited to see what they can do. They do play number 1 Gonzaga. They do play number 4 Villanova, and they do play number 19 UNC in the non-conference. But they make up for it in the fact they play in the Pac-12. And the Pac-12, save for Oregon, is pretty weak. So UCLA should have a good season. We'll see what they look like. I do think they'll need to win two, if not all 3 of the games in their non-conference that are marquee to set themselves up for a solid tournament run. Because I mean, if they have a good if let's say, I don't know if they play Oregon twice, but let's say they split their games against Oregon and they win the Pac-12 regular season and conference tournament, but lose to Villanova, not Kentucky, Villanova, UNC, and Gonzaga, then I don't think they're going to be a number 1 overall seed, which obviously muddies the waters and puts them in a different bracket than they would have if they won one of those games. I feel like so. It'll be interesting to see where they go, but I see the Bruins, who bring back a talented roster, being a Final Four team. So I'm excited to see what they can do. Which finally brings us to the SEC. And so just kind of the same thing as with Duke. Kentucky will return to form this season, and I actually think that they will. It was tough to say, because, if I'm picking which coach I like better, it's Coach K over Calipari. But, I mean, this is a Kentucky team that starts out as the preseason number 10 team. They also bring back two of their top 4 scorers from last season in Davion Mintz, who averaged 12 points a game. He is their leading three-point shooter at 38%. They also get back Keon Brooks, who is a junior. He averaged 10 points per game last season. They also get a transfer from West Virginia. He averaged 9 points, 8 rebounds last season. He was a big contributor as well. They play Kansas, Duke, and Ohio State in the non-conference. They play 4 of their 6 ranked SEC matchups on the road, which is pretty daunting. The SEC is pretty top-heavy, but Kentucky has some solid pieces returning alongside the youth that they have coming in. And Calipari, as we've seen in the past, is one of the best in terms of young rosters. So, in a sense, I feel like they kind of have the same setup that Duke has, and I just see Calipari doing more with what he has than Coach K, and that's why I think Kentucky will be better off. Better off than Duke as far as returning to form. And it's funny because Michael's in the waiting room right now. We're going to bring him in. And it's funny because I know exactly what GIF he just sent in Discord without even looking at it. So let's go ahead and bring in Michael from the MCT podcast as he is ready to go here. Michael, what is up, my dude? He's joining. He's connecting to audio. And please tell me you're not driving. He's also muted. You're muted.
There we go. That's better. Oh, I am not driving.
Okay, good.
Ran a little behind. Saw somebody on the side of the road who was stranded, so we went and took their gas can and got on gas. So saw you're still on. So I was like, okay, I got to get in here.
Good guy, Michael, helping people on the side of the road. Just a random person you ran into, or what?
Yeah, we were just driving back. We saw somebody with flashing lights, and we were both like, okay, we got to stop and help these guys.
Hey, you know what? I dig it. Good on you. That's some good karma right there. So you're just in time for conference champion predictions. So we're going to run through the gamut here. First of all, anything about – well, I'll let you comment a little bit on the Big Ten. We talked about if they're a 9-bid conference, and I know you're an Ohio State fan. Do you see them getting 9 teams in again this year?
All right, so we're talking basketball or football right now?
Basketball. 9 teams in what, Michael? The college football playoff? It's only 4 teams?
All right. It's been a very long game. So I think college basketball is going to see a similar thing like on college football this year, where everything has gotten a little topsy-turvy and no top team is safe. And it's been a very similar thing the last few years. I do see Ohio State winning the Big Ten title. I do not see them making a deep run at a college basketball playoff. As much as it hurts me to say, I don't think they have the firepower to actually go into the men's tournament and come out on top. They could, but I just see another Oral State or some random team just upsetting them. Was it Oral University? I can't remember.
Oral Roberts.
Oral something.
Oral Roberts.
Oral Roberts. Very bad memories of that game.
Yes, for sure.
I definitely see I see them taking the Big Ten. I see them getting to an Elite Eight, but I see another random team just knocking them out.
Yeah. So let's get into who we think is going to win each conference here. I'll go ahead. We'll go back and forth. I'll start with my ACC. You go with your ACC, and we'll go from there. ACC regular season champion. I'm going with North Carolina. We talked about earlier how, I'm not sure that Duke will be all the way back this year. Virginia seems to potentially be having an off year. Or could potentially have an off year. So I think North Carolina, could be primed to make a run. They're number 19 in the country preseason. I just have a feeling about the Tar Heels as ACC champions potentially.
See, I know Duke's going through a lot of turmoil, but I have learned a long time ago not to bet against Duke. So I'm going to have to contradict you a little bit here, man. I just see Duke figuring it out eventually and pulling through. North Carolina is going to be tough, and they're going to be right there with them, maybe within a few games of each other. But I do see Duke actually walking out on top in this one.
Yeah, I mean, it could go either way. I think Duke is going to have a better year than what they had last year for sure. It'll just be interesting to see. They did lose a lot of talent from last year. Going into the Big 12, we talked about Baylor earlier as well. They lost a ton, and even if Baylor were back to full force, it's hard to ever say that it's not Kansas's conference. Kansas will take crap from everybody all year in the football season because they know in basketball they just run circles around everybody. So Kansas basketball, I think, is going to be your Big 12 champion.
Well, I'm not going to argue that. There is no arguing that. Kansas is Kansas. Kansas will always be Kansas. So, yeah, I'm going to go right along there with you. Kansas is just going to walk the floor all over that division this year.
And then, so going on to the Big Ten, you already said yours is Ohio. Your champion choice is Ohio State. I'm going to go with Purdue. I think they've got a lot of, we've talked about it. Again, another plug for the preview that came out today for Purdue. They've got just such a talented team. I'm drinking the Kool-Aid that B. Scott had last last week with thinking they could be a potential Elite Eight Final Four team. So I think Purdue will end up in the Big Ten as the Big Ten champions. So going to the Pac-12, talked about how loaded UCLA is. So UCLA is my Pac-12 champion.
Oregon's Pac-12, right? I'm not mistaken.
Oregon's Pac-12, yes.
Yeah, I'm going to go Oregon.
Yeah,
I just have a really good feeling about the Ducks this year. I like you at UCLA, but my gut tells me Oregon, so I'm going to have to go with my gut.
Hey, I mean, the only other ranked team in the Pac-12, so, I mean, not a bad choice. And then SEC, talked about how, before we brought you in, we were going through each conference, and the question for the ACC was if Duke would be back. The question for the SEC was if Kentucky would be back, and I said I like Kentucky over Duke in that regard. So I'm going with Kentucky as your SEC champion. It's just the SEC, while they do have some good teams, Arkansas, Alabama, Tennessee, none of them really blow you out of the water. And I just like what Kentucky returns, as well as, having Calipari with a young roster having the ability to get Kentucky back to form.
And Kentucky is going to have a fantastic year. I'm sitting here running it through my head, like, do I like Alabama at all to challenge Kentucky? And I don't. I'm going to have to go with Kentucky. Full agreement with you there. They have been a perennial powerhouse for the last few years now. So I'm going to have to go ahead, side with you on Kentucky on that one.
Now for our final four predictions, so the way I typically do it, and I know you, Michael, you're probably just gonna name the top four teams off the top of your head. I don't know, how you typically prepare for something like this. What I typically do is I go through, even though it's based on no information, I go through what the bracketology is at the beginning of the year and just go through like I would if it was a tournament, if I was filling out my bracket for March Madness. And so these are the four teams I came up with. My final four predictions are Gonzaga, UNC, Michigan, and UCLA. Gonzaga, they've kind of turned the page. I know they still haven't won a championship yet, but they've turned the page from being that team that has great regular seasons and then are early exits to a team that you can kind of start banking on being there at the end of the year as the tournament winds down. I think UNC is going to have a bounce back year. Of course, they were my ACC champion, so I think they're going to be in there. Michigan, I know you hate to hear it, but is absolutely loaded on the basketball side of things. And then UCLA, I mentioned, was a Final Four team, so it would seem a little weird if I didn't have them in my Final Four. So yeah, that's my Final Four: Gonzaga, UNC, Michigan, and UCLA.
So I'm gonna go. I'm gonna agree with Gonzaga. And then I'm going to go UNC, Baylor, and you already know there's no way I'm going to pick the team up north to even touch the Final Four. They're going to be a first-round knockout as they deserve to be. They are that team. I'm going to go with Oregon to fill out that last spot.
There you go. All right. So, real quick, before we wrap up here, because I wanted to talk to you about this in the college football program or portion of the program, so we'll kind of book in the podcast with college football playoff talk. So, as far as the current format goes, because here's the interesting thing, and I was thinking about it last night and even some today. B. Scott and I always look at it from the standpoint of, I grew up watching Ball State football. He grew up a Purdue fan. I like Purdue as well. We always kind of, I think, because of that, because the fact that Ball State obviously and Purdue obviously will never, at least under the current format, have a chance to make the college football playoff. We kind of sympathize more with the Cincinnatis, with the other schools that typically don't get a shot at it. As an Ohio State fan, how do you feel about the current format? What do you think about it? And what should it be expanded? What are your kind of feelings on that? Because I don't know how much you guys really talk college football on the MCT podcast, so I want to give you an opportunity to get that out there.
Well, Chris and Tade really don't watch it a whole lot. I work most Saturdays, but I try and follow it as close as possible because I love me some college football. The playoff format should be expanded, and I feel like it needs to be less about who's going to sell tickets and who is the better team. And Alabama has had some rough games. I don't feel like they should be rated as highly as they are. Ohio State is definitely rated higher than they should be. I'm not complaining, but I feel like they're rated higher than they should be. And the teams like Cincinnati are just kind of getting left out. Purdue not being ranked at all is an absolute crime. So I feel like the current format needs to be expanded, and it needs to be less about what's going to sell, what's going to pull ratings, and more about who actually freaking deserves to be there.
Yeah. Well, and that's what
I don't know, God.
I was just going to say, that's what I was saying earlier, is the fact that, you have a team that, the storylines and the headlines kind of write themselves as the season goes along, that you refer to as the Spoilermakers, and yet there's no chance, even if they were to go the rest of the way and make the college football playoff. I mean, I guess in that sense they would have beaten Ohio State twice, so maybe they'd have a shot. But there's still no guarantee that a Purdue team would make the college football playoff, even though they've already garnered this reputation this year and over the past few years of being able to knock off the top teams. So, that's the main difference. If you were talking about Purdue, if they're in the same position in basketball where, they were kind of this underdog, you'd be psyched and everything would kind of right itself. But yet, in college football, you have a team that you refer to as the Spoilermakers, yet they're never going to get a chance.
It's just not fair. It's just absolutely fair. And I don't know what it's going to take to actually change some mindsets on that. But I know their main objective is to make money. Their main objective is to make money. And they're going to do whatever makes them the most money. And having, Bama, Oregon, Ohio State, and Georgia makes them the most money. Cool. But it's not what teams deserve. A team like Cincinnati, the underdog who has really proven against all odds, a team like Purdue, if they actually do win out, which obviously I hope they don't. No offense to B. Scott, but that was have to be my team twice, so obviously I don't want that. But a team like that, a team that has beaten top 5 teams should not be left out completely, and a team that, if they win multiple games against them, should be included in the playoff talk. But we'll never see it under the current format, and it needs to be reprised. BCS was badly broken. This isn't much better.
Yeah, I've tweeted out a few times that I'd almost prefer to have the BCS back than have what we currently have. So, but Michael, glad you were able to get in for a little bit here tonight. So thanks for joining us. Can't wait to hear what you guys have to say on the MCT podcast this week. But that will pretty much do it here for this week's edition of the Crash Course podcast. Thank you guys all for listening. We had, like I said, we every week stream this live on Twitch, twitch.tv/CraigCrash every Monday. So make sure you go ahead and check that. I probably shouldn't say Monday because I think next week we're going to do Tuesday, Wednesday. We're going to release on Wednesdays. So, so be on the lookout for that. Remember, you can follow us at 3C Media Sports on Twitter, 3C Media on Facebook, TikTok, and YouTube. And remember, you can listen to us every week on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, wherever podcasts can be heard. You can hear the Crash Course podcast. You can find me at Crash Course FM on Twitter. Michael, where can they find you?
Well, you can find me at DriveTru, DR1BETRU on Twitter, Twitch, and obviously you can find the MCT podcast airing most Saturdays and Sundays on obviously the 3C Media YouTube channel. Could be expanding on that eventually, but as of right now, that's the main way to find us.
Well, and if you also look at the channel too, you can see some great thumbnails made by Michael, so he's been killing it in that regard as well. But that will do it for this week. We'll be back next week with another great podcast, but until then, have a good one, everybody.